Hello, my name is Hassan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast, shorts. There's no co-host on these shorts episodes. We have extended the time on these shorter episodes from 5 to 6 minutes to 15 to 20 minutes for this season. This is so that these shorts can serve as introductory episodes released ahead of our weekly, longer form episodes. But don't worry, I will still let you know my observations, ideas, thoughts, or rants about the literature, philosophy, psychology, and even the theology of leadership, particularly as we prepare for the restoration of leadership and leadership principles during the next historical high in America. Why these episodes? Well, because listening to me talk about leadership for now around 15 to 20 minutes is still better than reading and trying to understand yet another business book. Even that business book that you bought with that famous person's name as the author, but you haven't applied any of the principles from that book to your leadership practices. At least not yet. In the West, we collectively are historically, philosophically, intellectually, and even morally past the height of the Enlightenment project. The Enlightenment, which encompassed a series of changes and transformations in the mindsets and attitudes of people born and raised mostly in Western Europe, although later globally, and then those who migrated to nations those people colonized, officially really kicked off with the German Reformation led by Martin Luther and ended, somewhat apocalyptically, with the nuclear holocaust at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That one sentence covers about 400 years, and it has to, because the scope of the Enlightenment project, driven almost exclusively by the idea that human reason and free inquiry could understand the nature of God, and finally that human reason could dethrone the nature of God himself, is still being felt today. From technology and science to social engineering via government, the ideas leaders are based in and do not think about are ideas that come from the Enlightenment project. The assumptions that undergird those ideas come from a position based on the idea from the ancient Greek thinker Protagoras, ruthlessly taken to its logical conclusion, that man is the measure of all things. In the midst of the Enlightenment project, about 250 years after Luther nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the Wittenberg Church and started a ball rolling downhill in Europe, some people, writers, scientists, thinkers, philosophers, and others, began questioning the idea, or at least began questioning the genesis of the idea that, quote-unquote, this is the best of all possible worlds. They looked around at the religious strife, sectarian violence, the natural upheavals and the results of colonial exploration beginning in the New World, and began to postulate that maybe the people in the world were making it broken and needed a swifter change than one that could be provided by the mere application of mere human reason. And since Gutenberg, that other progenitor of the Enlightenment project, created the technology of the printing press, anyone could publish their words to the world. Their words of objection, their words of support, or their words of skepticism. And almost every educated person has ever since felt an obligation to do so. But with that publishing comes a commitment to free inquiry, free speech, freedom to worship, as well as a commitment to all the consequences and repercussions, individual and corporate, that come from exercising such a privilege. And thus, we get to the author of our book that we are covering on the podcast this week. François-Marie Arouet, born November 21st, 1694, died May 30th, 1778, known by his nom de plume, Voltaire, was a French Enlightenment writer, philosopher, satirist, and historian. Famous for his wit and his criticism of Christianity, especially of the Catholic Church, and of slavery, Voltaire was an advocate of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and, of course, the separation of church and state. Voltaire was a versatile and prolific writer, producing works in almost every literary form, including plays, poems, novels, essays, histories, and even scientific expositions. He wrote more than 20,000 letters and 2,000 books and pamphlets. Educated by the French Jesuits at the Collège Louis le Grand from 1704 to 1711, he was taught Latin, theology, and, of course, rhetoric, all of which would come back to bite those same Jesuits deeply in the tuchus much later on in Voltaire's life. His best-known work and magnum opus, Candide, is a novella that comments on, criticizes, and ridicules many events, thinkers, and philosophies of his time, most notably Gottfried Leibniz, and his belief that our world is of necessity the quote-unquote best of all possible worlds. Look, much has been written and talked about Voltaire during his raucous life, through his death and way past, from misappropriating quotes from his works out of context all the way to mangled malapropisms that are throughout mass popular culture of the 20th century. His influence seems to have, just now in the last 25 years of the 21st century, begun to fade somewhat in the popular consciousness. Voltaire was one of those rare world-bending historical talents, much like Shakespeare, the Apostle Paul, Socrates, Plato, and even the Founding Fathers, whose writing was so massive and influential way beyond his lifetime that I think even he would be shocked and surprised. In the West, leaders are leading in a world deeply embedded in the ember of cynicism and irony. We lead because it is an obligation many times, not because we are inspired to. And yes, inspiration fades, but often when it does, we revert as leaders to the cultural easy road of obligation and responsibility, and we keep the irony, hardening into a shield to protect us from really saying what we really mean and really meaning sincerely what we say. This, of course, should come as no surprise. After all, we are way past the close of the Enlightenment project, and many of us who are leaders now were raised deep in the heart of the postmodern, post-Enlightenment project, where everything was deconstructed, meaning and authority was suspect, and the guardrails of tradition and security, positional, familial, or even communitarian, had long been pulled up and thrown into a massive bonfire in a field of social media posts, videos, and endless memes. The massive question of what do we do now cannot be sufficiently answered by the marketing research-driven articles published by the Harvard Business Review, or even by the self-help books that crowd the business section of Barnes and Noble. What do we do now? How do we get out of the postmodern, post-Enlightenment project? How do we lead with sincerity? How do we rebuild institutions? And of course, how do we create meaning? These are all questions that cannot be answered by a cynical detachment or even an ironic detachment from the things of the world. And these are massive questions that our current era cannot answer. And so maybe what we need to do now is go back to the past in order to rediscover the traditions, rhythms, patterns, and ways of being that were torn down by the Enlightenment project itself. Do we reject the fruits of modernity and post-modernity? Maybe we have to as leaders. After all, we have gotten as far as ironic detachment and cell phone technology can take us after all. Maybe mere human reason, now suspect, must be reassembled somehow and in some fashion. Not as another idolatrous golem, but as a partner on the long trek back to restoring what has been lost long lost in the path we have forged as leaders into this cul-de-sac of the thing we call, or the space we call, the future. And well, that's it for me.
Thank you for listening to the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast today. And now that you've made it this far, you should subscribe to the audio version of this show on all the major podcast players, including Apple iTunes, Spotify, YouTube Music, and everywhere else where podcasts are available. There's also a video version of our podcast on our YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the video version of this podcast on the Leadership Toolbox channel on YouTube. Just search for Leadership Toolbox and hit the subscribe button there on YouTube. And while you're doing that, leave a 5-star review if you like what we're doing here on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Just go below the player and hit 5 stars. We need those reviews to grow, and it's the easiest way to help grow this show. And tell all your friends, of course, in leadership. By the way, if you don't like what we're doing here, well, you can always listen to another leadership show. There are several other good ones out there. At least that's what I've heard. All right. Well, that's it for me.